No one believed Glenn Ford until he satisfied every doubt on screen. In 1958, Glenn Ford was the biggest movie star on the planet. #1 at the box office, bigger than John Wayne, bigger than Jimmy Stewart. He'd made over 100 films, spanning noir, westerns, comedy, and war pictures. He could draw a revolver and fire in 4/10 of a second, faster than any actor in Hollywood history. 5 of his films are now preserved in the National Film Registry. He earned a star on the Walk of Fame, a Golden Globe, and the loyalty of millions of moviegoers who saw him as the ultimate American everyman. But here's the part nobody talks about. Behind that quiet, decent screen image was a man who secretly recorded his own phone calls for 40 years, capturing conversations with presidents, movie stars, and lovers. A man whose son later revealed he documented affairs with 146 women in his private diaries. A man who was married 4 times, with his shortest marriage lasting less than 2 months. A man whose director told him to his face that he would never amount to anything in pictures. A man who spent the last 15 years of his life as a recluse, locked inside an 8,000-square-foot Beverly Hills mansion. Forgotten by the industry he once ruled, most people have no idea that before he became America's biggest movie star, he was a Welsh-named Canadian kid whose father drove a streetcar for a living. This is the untold story of Glenn Ford. Let's begin. 10. The Boy with the Unpronounceable Name. On May 1st, 1916, in a small hospital in Quebec City, a boy was born with one of the most unusual names in entertainment history, Gwilym Samuel Newton Ford. That Welsh first name, Gwilym, reflected a heritage that stretched back generations. His father, Newton Ford, was a railroad executive and paper mill owner of Welsh descent, and reportedly a nephew of Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister. His mother, Hannah Wood Mitchell, was an Anglo-Quebecer. Gwilym was their only child. The family lived in the tiny village of Sainte Christine d'Auvergne in Portneuf County, a place so small that most Canadians have never heard of it. For the first 6 years of his life, young Gwilym knew nothing but rural Quebec, cold winters, and the modest rhythms of small-town Canadian life. Then in 1922, everything changed. Newton Ford packed up the family and emigrated to California, settling first in Venice and then in Santa Monica. But this wasn't some glamorous Hollywood migration. It was a steep fall. Newton went from railroad executive to motorman on the Venice Electric Tram Company, a streetcar driver. He held that job until his death at age 50 in 1940. The family lived modestly. No luxuries, no connections, no safety net. But something about Southern California got into young Gwilym's blood. He fell hard for show business before he could even spell the word. He appeared in his first community theater production at age 4. As a boy, he started sneaking onto the Culver City studio lots at night, climbing fences and hiding in shadows just to watch movies being made. At Santa Monica High School, he threw himself into every drama production he could find. To earn money, he worked as a stable hand for Will Rogers, the legendary comedian and horseman, who gave him riding lessons that would later make him one of the most natural horsemen in Western film history. He also cleaned bars for $5 a week, laid roofing tiles, and operated a searchlight outside a movie house. His father, practical to the bone, gave him advice he never forgot. Newton told his son it was fine to try acting, but he should learn real skills first. Learn to take a car apart, learn to build a house from the ground up. That way, he'd always have something to fall back on. Gwilym took this to heart. He studied carpentry, electrical wiring, and plumbing. Decades later, at the height of his fame in the 1950s, when he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars per picture, he still did his own home repairs. That working-class ethic would define everything about his career, and everything about how Hollywood underestimated him. 9. The director who told him he'd never make it. Graduating from Santa Monica High around 1934, Ford joined a West Coast touring company as a stage manager. He made his stage debut in 1935 in a production of Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour. When he wasn't performing, he was building the sets. He toured in Golden Boy and worked as Tallulah Bankhead's stage manager in New York. He scraped by through the late 1930s, doing whatever theater work he could find. His first real shot at Hollywood ended in humiliation. In 1937, he did an unsuccessful screen test with 20th Century Fox. Nothing came of it. He managed to land only a tiny, forgettable part in a Paramount musical short, the kind of role that doesn't even get a credit. Then, in 1939, talent scout Tom Moore got him the lead in Heaven with a barbed wire fence, a low-budget Fox film written by Dalton Trumbo. It should have been his launching pad. Instead, it nearly ended his career before it started. His director on that film was Ricardo Cortez, a former silent film star turned filmmaker. Cortez watched Ford work and told him flatly to his face that he would never amount to anything in pictures. The young actor was devastated. He packed his bags, left Hollywood, and returned to New York, convinced the director was right. But Hollywood wasn't done with Gwilym Ford. Harry Cohn, the notoriously crass and tyrannical boss of Columbia Pictures, somehow saw potential in this quiet Canadian kid. Cohn signed Ford to a contract in 1939, the same year Ford became a naturalized United States citizen on November 10th. Cohn immediately tried to rename him John Gower. Ford refused. He agreed only to change his unpronounceable Welsh first name, choosing Glenn from Glenford, his father's birthplace in Alberta, Canada. Even in reinventing himself, he kept the family connection alive. Cohn put his new contract player through the B-movie mill. My Son is Guilty, Convicted Woman, Men Without Souls, Babies for Sale. These were bottom-of-the-barrel pictures, the kind studios churned out to fill double bills. But Cohn had a strategy. He was building a homegrown stable of stars at Columbia: Ford, Rita Hayworth, William Holden, and Rosalind Russell, rather than borrowing talent from rival studios. But Cohn deliberately pitted Ford and Holden against each other for roles, hoping the rivalry would keep them hungry and compliant. Instead, the two became lifelong best friends. Ford later recalled that they both stuffed paper in their shoes to appear taller than the other until neither of them could walk. So they said, "The hell with it," and laughed about it for the next 40 years. Ford's critical breakthrough came with So Ends Our Night in 1941, a drama about refugees fleeing Nazi Europe. The New York Times critic wrote that Ford drew more substance and appealing simplicity from his role than anyone else in the cast. President Franklin D. Roosevelt personally screened the film at the White House and invited the 25-year-old actor to his annual birthday ball. The boy with the unpronounceable name was no longer invisible. The biggest transformation of his life was about to begin. 8. The Marine who called himself a stamp collector. On December 13, 1942, while still filming Destroyer with Edward G. Robinson, Glenn Ford did something impulsive. He walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office and volunteered for the United States Marine Corps Reserve. Columbia Pictures had to beg the Marines for 4 extra weeks to finish the picture. At the recruiting desk, the sergeant asked for his occupation. Ford was too embarrassed to say he was an actor. He didn't want special treatment, and didn't want the other recruits to think he was some pampered Hollywood pretty boy. So he told the sergeant he was a stamp collector, and that's what went on his official paperwork. Despite being offered an officer's commission based on prior Coast Guard auxiliary service, Ford declined. He didn't want even the appearance of Hollywood privilege. He entered as an enlisted man, earned his rifle marksman badge, and was named Honor Man by his platoon at boot camp in San Diego, the highest distinction a recruit could receive. He was promoted to sergeant and assigned to the photographic section. A bout of duodenal ulcers landed him in the Naval Hospital for 5 months, and he received a medical discharge on December 7, 1944, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor. Now, here's where the Glenn Ford military story gets complicated. Over the decades, wild claims have circulated that Ford built safe houses in occupied France, was among the first Americans to enter the Dachau concentration camp, and filmed the Normandy landings. Military historians who reviewed his actual service records confirmed that none of this is true. Ford served exclusively at San Diego and Quantico as a photographic specialist. The combat myths likely arose from confusion with director John Ford, who actually did film combat operations with the OSS. But what is true, and what most people don't know, is that Ford's post-war military career was real and substantive. In 1958, he joined the Naval Reserve as a lieutenant commander. He was promoted to commander in 1963 and captain in 1968. In 1967, at age 51, he volunteered for a month-long tour in Vietnam, traveling with a combat camera crew from the DMZ to the Mekong Delta. He reportedly endured enemy shelling and accompanied a special forces team on a jungle mission. He received the Navy Commendation Medal for this service and maintained military ties for approximately 36 years across 3 conflicts. The stamp collector turned out to be one of the most genuinely dedicated military men in all of Hollywood. 7. The slap that made him a star. Ford returned from the Marines to find a role waiting that would change his life forever. In 1946, he was cast opposite Rita Hayworth in Gilda, a smoldering film noir directed by Charles Vider. Here's a detail that makes the story even better. Humphrey Bogart had been offered the male lead first and rejected the script, believing it would be nothing more than a woman's picture dominated by Hayworth. Bogart's loss became Ford's destiny. Ford later said something that became one of the most famous quotes in classic Hollywood. He said he became a star when he slapped Rita Hayworth. That single scene where his character strikes Gilda in a moment of jealous rage cemented Ford's tough guy image overnight. The film earned $3.75 million in domestic rentals alone, premiered at the inaugural Cannes Film Festival, and became a cultural touchstone that is still referenced in films to this day. But the Gilda story goes deeper than any movie. Ford and Hayworth began an affair during filming that would last on and off for 40 years. According to Ford's son, Peter, Hayworth became pregnant with Glenn's child during their next film together, The Loves of Carmen, in 1948, and traveled to Europe for an abortion. In 1960, Ford bought the property next to Hayworth's Beverly Hills home and installed a gate in the back fence so she could visit whenever she wanted. When Hayworth was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease decades later, Ford helped care for her. When she died in 1987, he was among her pallbearers. It was one of the longest, most complicated love affairs in Hollywood history, and it all started with a slap. 6. The film that launched rock and roll. By the mid-1950s, Ford was building one of the most versatile careers in Hollywood. But one film in particular changed not just his career, it changed American culture. In 1955, director Richard Brooks cast Ford as an idealistic teacher facing violent students in Blackboard Jungle. The film was explosive. It triggered riots in London. It was banned in Memphis and parts of Australia. U.S. senators demanded hearings. But here's the detail that connects Glenn Ford to one of the biggest cultural revolutions of the 20th century. Director Brooks needed a song for the opening credits. He discovered Bill Haley and his Comets' Rock Around the Clock when he heard Ford's teenage son Peter playing the record at their home. Brooks used it over the opening credits, making it the first rock and roll song featured in a major Hollywood film. The song shot to #1 and eventually sold over 25 million copies worldwide. Think about that. Glenn Ford's son accidentally introduced rock and roll to the movies. The film grossed $8.2 million worldwide and proved that Ford could carry a controversial social drama just as convincingly as he could carry a six-shooter. 5. The fastest gun in Hollywood. If there was one skill that set Glenn Ford apart from every other Western actor in Hollywood, it was his hands. Ford could draw a revolver from a holster and fire in 0.4 of a second. That's faster than John Wayne, faster than James Arness, faster than virtually any actor who ever strapped on a gun belt. His coach was Rod Redwing, a legendary fast-draw artist who trained dozens of Hollywood cowboys, and Redwing considered Ford his finest student. Combined with the horsemanship he'd learned from Will Rogers as a teenager, Ford brought an authenticity to Westerns that few actors could match. He appeared in 55 Westerns over his career, more than enough to fill a lifetime of Saturdays. His masterpiece in the genre was 3:10 to Yuma in 1957, based on an Elmore Leonard story. Ford was originally offered the hero's role. He turned it down. Instead, he insisted on playing the villain, Ben Wade, a charming, psychologically complex outlaw who dominates every scene, despite spending much of the film handcuffed to a bed. Ford considered it his favorite Western. The film was so good, it was remade 50 years later with Russell Crowe. In 1956, he starred in The Fastest Gun Alive, a title that could have been his autobiography. 4. The year he ruled Hollywood. In 1958, the Quigley Publishing Company released its annual poll of theater exhibitors, the industry's gold standard for measuring star power, and the name at the very top was Glenn Ford. Number 1. The biggest box office draw in the United States of America. That year alone, 4 Glenn Ford films hit theaters: Cowboy, The Sheepmen, Imitation General, and Torpedo Run. All commercial hits. He remained in the top 25 box office stars for 10 consecutive years, from 1955 to 1964. His range was staggering: film noir, westerns, comedy, war pictures, social dramas. No other star of his era moved so fluidly between genres. He won a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a comedy for Pocketful of Miracles in 1962. He earned a BAFTA nomination for The Sheepmen. He received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960 and was inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame in 1978, sharing the rare Golden Spur Award with only John Wayne. An asteroid, 3852 Glenford, was named in his honor. And yet, despite all of this, Glenn Ford was never nominated for an Academy Award. Not once. Not for Gilda, not for The Big Heat, not for 3:10 to Yuma, not for anything. It remains one of the most glaring omissions in Oscar history. A man with 222 screen credits and not a single nomination to show for it. 3. The Secret Recordings and 146 Affairs. On screen, Glenn Ford projected quiet decency. The reliable husband, the honest lawman, the good man. Off-screen, he was someone else entirely. His son Peter captured the truth bluntly. He said the image of his dad was that he was like Jimmy Stewart, an everyman. He was that on film. He wasn't that in private life. Ford married 4 times. His first wife was Eleanor Powell, the legendary dancer whom Fred Astaire himself called the best dancer in history, male or female. Eleanor retired from MGM stardom to raise their son Peter, born in 1945. The marriage lasted 16 years, but Ford's serial infidelity poisoned it from the beginning. Here's the detail that sounds like it belongs in a spy thriller. Ford installed a secret telephone recording system in their Beverly Hills mansion. The system recorded conversations for 40 years, capturing intimate exchanges with lovers and casual calls with Presidents Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, plus Frank Sinatra, John Wayne, Cary Grant, Gregory Peck, and dozens of other Hollywood legends. Eleanor finally filed for divorce on Ford's birthday in 1959, citing extreme mental cruelty. She said her marriage wouldn't have lasted as long as it did except for her religion. His 3 subsequent marriages followed a pattern of diminishing duration and increasing dysfunction. Actress Katherine Hayes lasted 3 years. A model, Cynthia Hayward, 32 years his junior, lasted 7. His final marriage to his nurse, Jean Boers, in 1993, lasted less than 2 months. According to Peter Ford's 2011 biography, Glenn Ford, A Life, his father documented affairs with 146 women in his personal diaries. The list reads like a Hollywood casting directory. Rita Hayworth, Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, Joan Crawford, Barbara Stanwyck, Gene Tierney, Brigitte Bardot, Debbie Reynolds, and Angie Dickinson, among many others. The gap between the screen image and the real man could not have been wider. 2. The death of his best friend. Of all the relationships in Glenn Ford's life, perhaps none mattered more than his friendship with William Holden. They'd been bonded since the early 1940s, when Harry Cohn tried to make them rivals at Columbia. Instead, they became brothers in every way that mattered. In 1981, Holden came to visit Ford and brought with him the cape from his breakout role in Golden Boy. He told Ford it was something very special to him, that they had been through a lot together, that Ford was his very best friend. They made plans for a reunion film together. It was going to be their comeback. 2 aging legends sharing the screen one more time. Weeks later, on November 11, 1981, William Holden was found dead in his apartment. He had fallen while drinking and hit his head on a nightstand. He bled to death alone on his bedroom floor. He was 63 years old. Ford was devastated. The reunion film would never be made. The best friend who had been there from the very beginning, the man who stuffed paper in his shoes, who refused to be a rival, who brought over his most precious possession as a gift, was gone. Ford never truly recovered from the loss. 1. 15 years of silence. The final chapter of Glenn Ford's life is the one that haunts you longest. His decline began with 3 expensive flops in the early 1960s that damaged his standing. By the 1970s, the new Hollywood revolution had swept past actors of his generation. He transitioned to television with the CBS series Cades County and took smaller film roles, including a memorable turn as Pa Kent in Superman in 1978, the man whose death teaches the young Superman that even infinite power has limits. Then, in 1991, blood clots in his legs hospitalized Ford at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in critical condition. He was forced to withdraw from the cable series African Skies. He'd been set for a cameo in Tombstone in 1993, but was too ill to appear. A series of strokes through the 1990s left him partially incapacitated. A severe drinking problem, which his son said nearly killed him, compounded the damage. The man who had once done his own stunts, who drew a pistol faster than anyone alive, who went hang gliding at age 64, was now confined to his octagonal Beverly Hills mansion, an 8,000-square-foot home he'd built in 1965, featuring an atrium with a 900-pound artificial sun hanging from the ceiling. He didn't leave that house for 15 years. For his 90th birthday on May 1, 2006, the American Cinematheque organized a tribute gala at Grauman's Egyptian Theater. It was supposed to be Ford's triumphant return to public life. Martin Landau, Shirley Jones, Jamie Farr, and Debbie Reynolds all showed up to honor him. Ford was too ill to attend. He had recorded a video message the week before, which was screened for the audience. It was the last time most of them saw his face. On the afternoon of August 30th, 2006, exactly 4 months after that birthday, Beverly Hills police were dispatched to Ford's home at approximately 4 p.m. Paramedics found him dead inside of natural causes, at age 90. His son Peter and Peter's wife Linda, who had moved in 12 years earlier to care for him, were nearby. He was interred at Woodlawn Cemetery in Santa Monica, the same California beach town where a 6-year-old Welsh-Canadian boy had once sneaked onto studio lots at night, dreaming of a life in pictures. A cenotaph stands beside his parents' graves in Portneuf, Quebec, connecting him in death to the tiny village where his story began. Let's do a quick recap. Glenn Ford was born Gwillem Samuel Newton Ford in rural Quebec, Canada, in 1916. His family emigrated to California when he was 6. His father went from railroad executive to streetcar driver. Young Glenn worked as a stable hand for Will Rogers, cleaned bars for $5 a week, and sneaked onto studio lots at night. His first director told him he'd never make it. Harry Cohn signed him to Columbia Pictures and put him through B-movies until Gilda made him a star in 1946. He served in the Marines during World War II, calling himself a stamp collector at the recruiting office. He later served in Vietnam at age 51 and earned the Navy Commendation Medal. He could draw and fire a revolver in 0.4 of a second. He was named the #1 box office star in America in 1958. He appeared in 222 productions over 5 decades. 5 of his films are preserved in the National Film Registry. He was never once nominated for an Academy Award. He secretly recorded his phone calls for 40 years. His son revealed he had 146 documented affairs. He married 4 times. He lost his best friend, William Holden, in 1981. He spent the last 15 years of his life as a recluse, and he died on August 30th, 2006, at age 90, in the Beverly Hills mansion he hadn't left in over a decade. Sidney Poitier once said of Glenn Ford that he had those magical qualities that are intangible, but are quite impactful on the screen. He was a movie star. He was also, as his own son concluded, one of the greatest actors and one of the most under-acknowledged ones. A man whose 222 roles earned him a permanent place in film history, even as the real Glenn Ford remained hidden behind the characters he played. If you made it this far, it means you're one of the few people who truly appreciate the legends of classic Hollywood. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, and leave a comment telling me which Glenn Ford film is your favorite. I'll see you in the next video. Next, I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one. I'm going to use the same color as the other one.